Hello, welcome to a new edition of Writers Behaving Badly. My name is Suffer Jerome, and my goal for the Writers Behaving Badly series isn't to make fun of people or to make their lives terrible, but in fact to educate and inform the rest of us of what not to do when it comes to trying to build our writing careers, or even if we already have successful careers, how to not topple them over the edge of the cliff. So there are two instances I would like to discuss today, even though I know there's like 55 or more instances that have happened in the horror field over the last few months that I could certainly address, but let's just pick two for today. And they're a little bit related. So the first instance I'd like to discuss was a little scuttlebutt that happened the other day about the Twisted Book of Shadows. Now, for those who don't know, The Twisted Book of Shadows was an anthology put together in order to help illuminate diverse writers, and it was put together through a Kickstarter campaign where people could donate to get the book published, and donations also went to pay the writers and all the fees associated with publishing a beautiful book, paying writers and editors, and so on and so forth. And this is done a lot in the writing business these days, and so that's just fine. So, with the Twisted Book of Shadows, they had some writers already picked, and then there were some slots available for other writers, and the whole process was anonymous. So, when you sent in your story, your name was stripped from the story, and so the panel of editors would read the story and then pick the best stories or the stories that they felt were best suited together in their anthology Twisted Book of Shadows. Now I have to admit, I too submitted to Twisted Book of Shadows, and I was rejected, as hundreds of us were, because the call was so huge. The hundreds, I believe it was something like 900 submissions or something. And I don't remember exactly how many they took in the end, but it's like probably 12 to 15, which is normal anthology length. So there's hundreds of writers who did not get their stories published, and like I said, I'm one of them. And this is how it goes when you choose to become a freelance writer. Now, in this case, you cannot say that they played favorites or anything like that because it was blind submission, and the panel went through their process and picked the stories that worked best. However, apparently the other day, someone who submitted to this anthology decided to have a little bit of a temper tantrum on the Twisted Book of Shadows Facebook page. I personally missed all the drama because I was working and oblivious to it till it was over, but I managed to gather what happened just reading a few odd Facebook posts. That's all we need to know for purposes of this video. Is that someone who had submitted to the Twisted Book of Shadows was upset that his story, I think it was a him, his story wasn't picked, and he went on to self-publish it. And he had a lot of success with his self-published story, apparently, according to what I could gather. And I don't know his name, so I can't look up to see exactly what the book was because the thread was all taken down by the time I got to go and check it all out. But the illustration of the story is still the same, that he went on to say his story was very successful as a self-published standalone story, and so he came on to the Facebook page to tell the editors that they made a huge mistake in not picking his story, and that he had read all the stories in the book after it was published, and none of the stories were as good as his story, and la la la. And berating the editors and showing off and whatever. And he also made a point, I believe, about how he had actually contributed to the Kickstarter, and so he also was miffed as well that his story wasn't chosen because he had donated to the Kickstarter. So I'd like to say that often when publishers do Kickstarters, it's not expected that you get to have a story in it unless it's a specific level and a I can't talk today, specific parameter of how the anthology is put together. But anyways, so I guess he was having a bad day or whatever, and apparently a lot of people got on board this thread and things were said or not said, and it all exploded. But anyways, now everyone knows this guy's name, and all the editors, because these were, you know, big editors in the horror field, putting this stuff together, and it's a who's who, and the horror field is tiny. And I talk about the horror field because I'm in the horror field too. This is why I mostly focus on horror field for writers behaving badly, in case you've never watched one of my videos before. So anyways, now everyone knows his name and that he has an attitude, and so we'll see what happens to his career down the road. Which brings me to the second story I'd like to address quickly. And this morning I was checking out Facebook a bit, and in one of the horror writers groups, there was a discussion going about anthologies with themes. And a lot of the writers were complaining because there are anthologies with themes, and they're upset because they don't want to write for anthologies with themes because it's too hard. I mean, this hurts my head so badly. I can't even understand what they're trying to say. Now, if you're trying to have a writing career or you have a writing career is not a hobby. So if you're a professional working writer, you go where the work takes you. Like I said, I submitted to Twisted Book of Shadows and was rejected. So now I have that story floating around to submit somewhere else. And there's been many times in my own career I have written stories specifically for themed anthologies, and they've been rejected, and then you have to try and sell the story. So no one is forcing you to submit to a themed anthology at all, ever. There's already too many submissions. No matter how many there are, there's too many. So no one's going to care that you are too lazy to write to a theme. I just find it really interesting how the modern writers, like the budding writers, they have such different attitudes than us old school writers. Because back in the day, themes were preferable because then it's you could hone it in and maybe have a better shot at the thousands of people who are going to submit, as opposed to these days, most anthologies have wide open themes, and so you it's less of a chance. I feel like it's less of a chance to get in because what may happen is the editors start to pick stories, and then they may find a certain theme within the stories that are coming in, and they'll hone it to that theme, and your story may be totally out of that, and so you can't sell it anyways. However, themed anthologies are great. Okay, it's a ghost anthology, write a ghost story. Okay, you get rejected. Okay, so now you sell a ghost story somewhere else. There's always, if you're in the horror field, there's always room for stories. And unless you're doing something super, super specific, like mermaids who order pizza and turn into ghosts or something like that, then you will place your story somewhere else unless it's a super, super, super specific call about something specific. So writers, when you're writing for themes, follow the guidelines, and it's a great writing exercise to learn how to write to what people want. This is part of your job. If you're a writer, it's a job. And just like any jobs, you have to send in your resume being your work. You don't get paid at other jobs doing whatever the hell you want. So why would it be the same as a writer? And then to go on about rejections for one more minute, I say this pretty much every video, is that when you get rejected, it's not necessarily because your work is inferior or not up to par or total crap, although it very well could be. However, the main reason people get rejected is just that the story didn't fit in with the other stories. And like I just said, when stories start coming in for whether it's themed or unthemed anthologies, the editors may find kind of a rhythm or a atmosphere or a style of writing that starts to take shape as they're pulling the stories together. And it's like a little puzzle, when I put together a couple anthologies myself, so I understand how it works. And so you start to get a theme and a rhythm going with these stories, and then so you may get some really amazing stories, and there are lots of amazing, wonderful stories that get rejected all the time, but they're just not fitting in with this collection that's taking shape. And in fact, this happened to me myself recently for the Pulp Book of Horrors 2. I'm in the Pulp Book of Horror Phobias 1. I have a story in there, and my phobia was the number 5. And then in the Pulp Book of Horror Phobias 2, I sent in a story, which I worked really hard on. I find it really hard to write stories. It takes me 3 or 4 months to write a short story. And so I worked hard on this story and I sent in this story to the anthology. And at first they liked it, but then as other stories came in, my story didn't fit the tone and the theme of other stories in the anthology. So the editor wrote to me and said they're going to reject my story, but there's still time if I want to try and come up with another story and they'll see if it'll fit or not or whatever. They're giving me a little bit of a break. So I sat down and that story I wrote really fast. For me, I think it was 2 weeks or something. That's really fast for me for a short story. I know some people can write a short story in an hour. I'm not one of them. And so then I wrote that story, and I checked with them of the theme and stuff, and wrote that. And then that one fit in better because she had explained to me how the book was kind of moving in a different direction and said, these are the things we don't want now. These are things we're kind of looking for. And so I did it, and it was fine. And I'm in there, and I'm excited because it's the Pulp Book of Horror Phobias coming out any minute now, and Stephen King's in there too, and I'm super excited. So writing is a job, and so you can choose how to do your job. You can choose what you want to submit to or not. But if you get rejected from an anthology, be gracious. Don't have a temper tantrum online. Don't berate the editors, especially in the horror field, because it's very small and everybody knows everybody. And you know, there's only so many slots, and editors are more apt to work with writers who don't make a lot of noise. Although, there's always exceptions to that. But think about in your own job. Like if you're a manager, who are you going to hire? The squeaky wheel or someone who does their job and goes above and beyond their jobs and doesn't make waves and makes your life a living hell and calls you out publicly and all that. All right, so those are your two little writing behaving badly ideas for today. Just be cool. Treat it like a job. Your last work is your calling card. And if you don't want to write for a themed anthology, don't. Like, just don't. There's lots of us that do want to write for them and get paid. So have a fantastic day, and we'll see you later.